Today, guys, we are talking about the Great War, also known as World War I, which lasted from 1914 to 1918. This was 100 years ago. So open up your notes to a brand new page, World War I. Now, of course, they didn't call it World War I originally. They didn't actually call it World War I until World War II happened. Originally, they called it the Great War. So make sure you guys write that down at the top of your notes. And here we go. It's not a lot of notes. It's just a little bit to write today. The Great War, World War I. Here we go. So why even call it a Great War? It's not because everybody was like, oh yeah, this is an awesome war. Woohoo, it's so great. No, it's called a Great War because it involves almost all of Europe. And they mean great as in like a large scale. It's happening with a larger amount of countries than ever before. And it changes the world more than ever had been changed up to that point. If you look at Europe before World War I, which is shown over on this side of the map over here, and then you compare what Europe looks like after World War I, just 5 years later, there are some massive changes. Like over here, you'll see the shape of Germany is completely different from how it is after World War I. You'll see that there are some countries that are completely obliterated off the map, like Austria-Hungary over here does not exist over on this other map. It's split into two countries, Austria and Hungary, and there's even some new countries that are formed out of nothing. All this land that belongs to Germany before World War I is turned into a place called Poland afterwards, and it actually helped set up World War II, which is why we're covering World War I. You cannot understand World War II unless you understand why World War I happened. So why did it happen? That's what we're going to be looking at today. What were the major causes of World War I? Now, I call them the main causes. Good keywords to put off to the side, because each letter of the word main actually stands for a different reason. So the M stands for something called militarism. If you want to save yourself a little bit of time, after you write each word, save yourself a couple of lines of space, because all the rest of this set of notes is just me explaining what each of these four things are. And you just have like a sentence that you need to write for each thing. So if you leave some space, that'll make it a little easier on yourself today. So anyhow, M is for militarism. A is for alliances. I is for something called imperialism. And finally, N is something called nationalism. And I'm going to explain what all four of these things mean, and hopefully you saved yourself a little bit of space. Of course, if I'm going too fast or anything, you can always pause the video, write stuff down, and then continue on and make it easier on yourself. But here we go. What is militarism? Well, militarism is when countries try and one-up each other by building bigger weapons. It's kind of like, imagine two kids who are playing in the backyard, and they've got like this Nerf gun battle that they're going to do. Well, one day, each of them brings a Nerf gun. One of them has a small pistol, and then the other person brings an automatic that fires several shots. Well, maybe the next time they play, the kid who had the pistol is going to want to bring a bigger weapon or something better, so he stands a better chance. Well, in real life, countries were building up weapons to try and one-up each other. So countries were building machine guns and bombs and artillery and all kinds of weapons to be able to one-up each other. And you have to understand, during the 1800s, the time period where we're looking at all those inventions that were being made, what we covered last week, there's not a lot of wars going on in Europe at the time. In fact, from about 1870 to 1914, there's about a 40-50 year period where there's almost no wars happening in Europe, and people are just building up weapons. They're creating all of these weapons, and nobody's actually using them for anything. And it's kind of like going out and buying a brand new car. If you buy something brand new and you invest money in it, you kind of want to take it for a test drive. Well, the same thing with these weapons. They are building up their militaries, which is why we're calling this militarism, and they kind of want an excuse to be able to test these new weapons. So for 50 years, countries like Germany, France, England, all of these countries are building up tons of different weapons, and they're just stockpiling them, waiting to see if they're ever going to actually use them. That's militarism. At the same time, the countries are worried about being attacked by other countries that have really good weapons. And that brings us to the next thing, alliances. Now, this is a lot of stuff to write here. So if you don't want to write all of this, if you just want to write what an alliance is, that is okay with me today. Okay? But an alliance is when one country teams up with another country and says, well, if anybody attacks you, we will come help you out if you're ever attacked. You know, that's an alliance. It's countries coming together to mutually protect each other. And right before World War I, a whole bunch of different countries had alliances with each other. There was an alliance called the Triple Entente. France was allied with Great Britain, and they said they would protect each other in case of war. Great Britain was allied with a country called Belgium. Belgium was allied with a country called Russia, and Russia was allied with a tiny little country called Serbia. So they all had kind of mutual protection ideas here, where if one country gets hurt, then the others are going to step up and protect them. Now, when Germany and some other countries were hearing about some of these alliances forming, they formed their own alliances. They called their alliance the Triple Alliance. Germany allied with a country called Turkey, and Turkey allied with a country called Austria-Hungary. There is only one problem with this type of alliance. The problem is if one country gets attacked, let's say a do-nothing little country like Serbia, which you've probably never heard of before, if they get attacked and it pulls in Russia, it automatically triggers the alliances and everybody gets involved. So in other words, if Serbia gets attacked, Russia gets pulled in. And if Russia gets pulled in, then Belgium gets pulled in. And if Belgium gets pulled in, then Great Britain gets pulled in. And then France gets pulled in. And basically what could have been just a conflict between two small nations suddenly draws everybody into this major conflict. And that's a major reason why World War I affects so many countries, is because it starts because of a conflict between two little tiny countries, and it spreads into something bigger, and everybody wants to use the new toys, their new weapons that they've been developing for the last 50 years. The next reason is imperialism. Imperialism was this idea in the 17 and 1800s where countries would turn into empires. They would control other smaller countries, take over territory, and make them buy and sell stuff only with their country to be able to make money off of them, creating basically huge empires. So like during the 1800s, places like England and France and Germany carved up sections of Africa and created territories that they owned. They also owned territories in other places around the world as well. And the idea was, if you could grab new territory for yourself, your country would expand. So why is this a cause of World War I? These countries are more than willing to go to war with each other, thinking that the reward of going to war might be they can take territory from each other. Like Germany's thinking they might be able to take territory away from France, and vice versa. So that's just another reason why they were encouraged to want to go to war. And then finally, the last reason is nationalism. The belief that people should support their country, have their own country, and believe strongly in their country. Believe in their country so much they're willing to almost do anything their country says. So when these countries go to war with each other, nationalism is this idea that people are willing to go off to war and fight for their country because they believe in their country so much. When Germany goes to war, a lot of the Germans immediately sign up because they fervently believe in their country. Same thing with France and Britain and all the other European countries. There's this strong sense of pride and patriotism, which is not a bad thing. You know, as an American, I have a lot of pride in this country. But if you take something, even a good thing, too far, and it goes to a point where you believe in your country so much that your country can do no wrong, well, that's a different matter. Okay? Now, these four reasons, they really caused World War I, but there is one major event that triggers all of it, that causes the alliances to finally depend on each other and actually call on each other for help. There's one event that pulls on people's patriotism and their nationalism is charged up and they're ready to fight. One event happens, and it all has to do with a love story. It's true. Let's look at the map of Europe before World War I, and this will make a little bit more sense. Now, you see Germany, France, and the United Kingdom, England over here. Those are pretty easy to see. But I want to draw your attention to a tiny little country here called Serbia, which is on the border of Austria-Hungary. Now, Austria-Hungary has an emperor. And this emperor has a son who is in his 20s at the time we're going to be talking about here, who's kind of a good-for-nothing, do-nothing son. His son is named Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Okay? So there's the emperor and his son, and their country, Austria-Hungary, is right next to Serbia. And Serbia and Austria-Hungary hate each other. They have been stealing each other's territory back and forth for years. They can't stand each other, and they both want to take over each other's countries. Now, Serbia is smaller than Austria-Hungary, and Austria-Hungary is very proud. They've got their monarch, their king, their emperor, and the royal family. But the king is getting really old, and his son, who is in his 20s or so, is unmarried. He's kind of a lazy, good-for-nothing that sits on the couch all day long. And one day, the emperor turns to his son and says, "You have got to get your life together. Come on, you need to get married, have babies, so we can have more kings and queens of Austria, and the royal family can continue on forever." And Franz Ferdinand is not crazy about this idea. But then the king turns to his son, the emperor turns to his son and says, "If you don't get married, I'm going to cut you off. You're going to get no money from me. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to send you off to a retreat, a castle out in the mountains. There is a widow there who lives with her 3 daughters. And her 3 daughters are wealthy. They have some royal blood in them. And you are going to fall in love with one of those daughters, or so help me, I'm going to cut you off." So Franz Ferdinand, the son, he spends an entire summer, 3 months, over in this castle with this widow, this mother, and her 3 daughters. And every day he goes horseback riding and swimming and playing tennis, and he gets to know these 3 daughters. And of course, the mother wants him to fall in love with one of her daughters as well, because that means she'll be connected more to the royal family here. Franz Ferdinand does fall in love during that summer. He meets someone that he falls in love with. But it's not one of the daughters. It's not the mother either. The mother finds out about this the hard way. You see, Franz Ferdinand falls in love with someone, and in those days, the custom was you would keep a picture of the person that you loved in a pocket watch, a watch that would dangle from your shirt, had a chain on it, you would open it up, and there would be a picture of the person that you loved in there. One day, Franz Ferdinand is playing tennis, and when he's done playing tennis, he accidentally leaves his watch on the courts. And the mother, who is taking a daily walk, stumbles upon this watch on this tennis court. She walks over and she thinks, "I'm going to open up this watch and I am going to find the picture of the person that the emperor's son loves, and it's going to be one of my daughters." She opens up the watch, and lo and behold, inside is a picture of their maid. Yes, Franz Ferdinand had fallen in love with the maid who was in charge of cleaning the castle. Her name was Sophie, and he was head over heels in love with her. Well, of course, the mother is outraged. She calls up the emperor and says, "Your son's fallen in love with a peasant girl. Get rid of her. We need to take care of this." Franz Ferdinand goes up to his dad and says, "I'm going to marry that girl, and there's nothing you can do about it." And the dad says, "If you marry that girl, I'm going to cut you off from all your wealth." And the son says, "If you don't let me marry that girl, I will renounce the throne, and there will be no one else who will take over to be king when you are dead." When the king hears this, he backs down, and he lets Franz Ferdinand and his wife and the maid marry. They become husband and wife under one condition: Sophie cannot be seen in public with her husband at any time because of the shame of him marrying a peasant girl. The king says, "Yep, you can marry her, you can have kids together, and your kids will be royal, but you can't stand in public with your wife because I don't want people seeing you with a peasant girl." Of course, this upsets Franz Ferdinand, but he agrees to it. They get married, and they have several kids. Well, time passes by. Yes, this actually leads to the start of World War I. This whole story, no joke, so stay with me. Time passes. I believe about 20 years pass, but I could be mistaken on the time. They have several kids together by this point, and I believe he's like in his 40s or so, and his wife, she's in her late 30s by this time. She's pregnant one last time. And there is a tiny little town on the border, right? It's inside Austria, but it's between Austria and Serbia, called Sarajevo. And the mayor of Sarajevo says, hey, you know what? Why don't we invite the prince to come down here with his wife, and we're going to throw a parade in their honor. And the mayor turns to the prince, Franz Ferdinand, and tells him, if you come down here, I will let you and your wife be in the parade together. People will get to see your wife in public. Now, this is a big deal because for 20 years, she hadn't been allowed to be seen in public at royal gatherings. So Franz Ferdinand, he takes any opportunity he can to show off his wife because he is deeply in love with her. And so he agrees to do this parade. The problem is because this city is on the border between these two countries, there's a lot of unrest here. There's a lot of violence that happens here because the people in Serbia want Austria to have some of their territory given over to Serbia. So there are constantly terrorist attacks and things like that happen. And when a group of Serbian terrorists learn that the prince is going to be in this parade, they hatch a plan to assassinate him. This is in the summer of 1914. And what ends up happening is there is a terrorist organization called the Black Hand. They are led by a 20-some-year-old guy named Princip. I can't remember his full name. But he's basically this kid who is leading this terrorist group with the idea that they are going to assassinate the prince to protest the fact that there's territory in Austria that the Serbians believe rightfully belongs to them. And they come up with a plan. And it is, without a doubt, the worst terrorist plan I have ever heard of. This is the way it works. It'll be a little better if I can show you by drawing this. But the way this works is they know the prince is going to be riding in a motor car, in a car, down a street. So let's go ahead and draw a street here. All right, here's our street. And Princip's plan is he's going to have a terrorist here, 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 and here, and they are going to be armed with hand grenades. Yeah, no joke. This is the plan they come up with. They're going to be armed with hand grenades. Their plan is when the car drives by, they're going to chuck a grenade inside the car and it's going to blow up and kill the prince. That's their plan. And it goes horribly from the very get-go. It is a completely stupid plan. And honestly, the prince shouldn't even have been down there to begin with. The only reason he's down there, he knows there's a lot of violence down here, but he wants to show off his wife because he's so in love with her. Well, the day of the parade, they get in a motor car. They get in their vehicle. This is a convertible, a topless car, so there's no top to it, all right? There is the prince's car, and then behind him is the mayor's car, and there's several cars in a whole line. You know, it's a typical parade. Well, the day of the assassination, all four terrorists line up on the streets, and they gather around, and there's huge crowds. But one of the terrorists loses his nerve. He gets so chickened out and scared, he runs away, and he decides he's not going to participate. Another terrorist, he is bunched in so much with the crowd. There's such a dense crowd of people there. He's gathered in. He doesn't have enough room to be able to throw his grenade. He can't actually move his arms very well, so he is completely incapacitated. He can't do anything. The third terrorist, he's standing in a place where there's a policeman right there, right next to him, and he realizes, oh, nope, he can't participate either, so he's unable to do anything and attack during the whole time. That leaves only one terrorist left when the parade is going down the street, and it is the 20-some-year-old Princip, the leader himself. Now, the prince, Franz Ferdinand, he's driving down, he's got a chauffeur, so it's in the front, he's got a chauffeur driving, and he and his wife are sitting in the back, and his wife is pregnant at the time, and they are driving down the street. And Princeps sees his opportunity, the young terrorist. He pulls out his hand grenade, pulls the pin, chucks it at the car. The hand grenade hits the very back of the Archduke's car, bounces off of it, hits the car behind it, and explodes, injuring all the guys inside the car behind him. It completely goes after the wrong person. The Archduke and his wife are completely unharmed. Princip, the terrorist, is so upset about this, he goes to the nearest bar and starts drinking, thinking that he has completely messed this up. The prince, though, the Archduke, Franz Ferdinand, after the parade is over, he decides he wants to visit the hospital where the mayor and the other people in the car behind him were taken to, because he feels bad that they got injured during this whole thing. So he tells his driver, "You need to go to the hospital so I can go visit them." Unfortunately, the driver doesn't know the streets of Sarajevo really well, and he gets lost. So as he's driving to the hospital, he takes the wrong route, and the driver decides he needs to stop and ask for directions. The driver stops in front of a bar. Yes, it is the very bar where inside the young terrorist Princip is sitting, drinking away his sorrows. Now he's sitting at the bar stool and he looks in the mirror, a typical bar mirror. He looks up there and sees reflected in the mirror the Archduke's car sitting there outside the bar. Filled with rage, the terrorist takes out a handgun, runs out, and fires several shots. Boom! 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 A couple of shots hit Sophie, the wife. She dies almost immediately. A couple of shots hit the Archduke, one in the neck and one in the chest. And as he is laying there and he's dying, he turns to his wife and he's begging her. He says, "For the sake of our kids, Sophie, please don't die. Please don't die." Both of them die within minutes. This is the event that starts World War I. The terrorist, after he sees that he's killed both of these people, he's really happy about it, but he knows that the crowd who love the Archduke is going to try and attack him. He takes a suicide pill, cyanide, but it's an old pill. It doesn't work very well, and instead he just gets really sick. The crowd comes over and they beat him up. He's later arrested and tried for treason and hanged and killed, but it still doesn't prevent what happens afterwards. You see, Austria tells Serbia, "You killed our prince. Therefore, you need to surrender to us." They give them a whole series of conditions Serbia has to meet, and they say, "If you meet these conditions, then we will not go to war with you." Serbia refuses, and both sides call on all of their alliances. Austria says, "Hey, we're going to attack you because you killed our prince." So they send in an invasion force. Serbia calls up Russia. Russia calls up Belgium. Belgium calls up France. France calls up Britain. And they're all like, "Hey, please help us because we're going to be attacked." And then Austria-Hungary calls up Germany, and Germany calls up Turkey. And all of these countries, all of those alliances that I showed you earlier, form, and they go to war against each other. Because this prince is assassinated, all of these countries line up willing to defend each other, and World War I begins. And it's all because of a love story. Now we'll talk about what fighting actually happened with World War I and some of the battles and things like that. Notice I've left America out. America is not involved in the first 2 years of World War I. We will look at when they're involved in the last 2 years a little bit later. But that is how World War I, the Great War, actually began. All because of a love story and one of the worst assassinations in all of history.